people globally about the effects even of dangerous materials such as oil on resources which this community would rely on for their livelihood. And I'm not just talking about the health dangers that it poses. Surely there are protocols that are in place. Is there no independent monitoring of operations like these?
There are all kinds of protocols, regulations, government ministries, but it's all completely ineffectual and doesn't really work, and depends on the oil companies to basically bring them to sites, assess what's going on, and frankly, it just doesn't work, and everyone knows it doesn't work. There's massive evidence. And the result is the Niger Delta is absolutely chronically polluted. So just on this spill, we've been fighting for a decade to get Shell to clean up. The regulator wasn't getting them to clean up beforehand. So it's because there's a case in London that has forced them to finally clean up. And we didn't want to go to trial. The community didn't want to go to trial, but when we had it independently assessed by experts, they said, look, only 7% of the oil has been removed. The rest of it is still there. And it's going to carry on repolluting the environment and continue to pose a really serious risk to public health. All kinds of illnesses are going to come to this. It's carcinogens, respiratory illnesses, all kinds of things are a risk for future generations.
And I know you said that the problem was not so much the amount, but the fact that it was left to, the spillover was left for more than 2.5 months. But 600,000 barrels sounds a lot to me. Or is this in comparison to the area in which the spillage occurred?
No, it's 600,000 barrels we estimate came out of those oil spills and went straight into the environment. And in fact, Shell's own experts don't disagree that there's a vast amount of oil that was trapped in this environment, far outstrips anything that, like the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska, which got worldwide headlines. This was by some factors, by about a factor of 10, more serious in terms of the volume of oil, and it was in an area where people live. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people.
And 30,000 compared to 600,000 barrels. In comparison, I mean, that's a huge amount if one calculates the risks of how immediately the community then would be threatened. As you say, not just the environmental risks, but as you say, the carcinogens that would be within the soil, within the drinking water, etc., etc.
No, absolutely. And we've been trying to get Shell for years to do a health assessment of the community. We've been trying to get them to just test the drinking water, to bring clean water to the community. The answer is no. They just won't do it. Absolutely not. And this is a company. This is I think it's Britain's richest company. It's one of Europe's richest company. It made $40 billion of pure profit a couple of years ago, and it just is considering these individuals as expendable. It just, this community just simply doesn't matter, and it's only because we've been able to get this community has been able to take their case to London that this is getting headlines and that it's getting really careful attention from the legal process in London, that they're sweating. They're really feeling that they're under a lot of scrutiny.
And I want to talk about the legal culpability. Who should be responsible for the cleanup? We mentioned SPDC's role there, Shell's Nigerian subsidiary. So it sold this to Renaissance. And were there any agreements about past or even current operations and what the obligations are, particularly if you talk about the fact that in 2014, Shell had to pay about £15 million in settlement to the border community. So already problems existed that the community was aware of, that Shell was aware of?
Well, they actually ended up having to pay 55 million, which went to 15,000 families directly.
Apologies, I thought I had actually said 55 million pounds, but yes.
Oh, did you? Sorry, I misheard you. 55. Yes, I mean the whole Renaissance thing is quite interesting because it's slightly smoke and mirrors. What it is Shell have sold their onshore operations to Renaissance, so Renaissance becomes the shareholder. But they're still getting the oil, and they're still offering technical expertise, and they've loaned them the money to buy their shares. So it's slightly just kind of changing the name plaque on the company's house, but fundamentally the relationships remain very similar to what they were. So let's be under no illusion. This is still fundamentally Shell that's responsible for it all, and remains responsible for having failed to clean up this environment. Now, I understand Shell is offering some kind of indemnity to Renaissance, so they'll pick up the costs of their environmental legacy. I don't know the full details. It's all been very secretive. And another feature of this, which is shocking, is that the Nigerian government initially said, no, this is not a deal we can approve, because we're just not clear if Renaissance can do the cleanup of not only Bodo but other communities, hundreds of communities around the Niger Delta. And then the evidence, it seems, from reports in the financial press, are that Shell then threatened to withhold investments on their offshore facilities unless the government changed its mind. So the whole thing is extremely murky, but people should be under no illusion. Fundamentally, Shell is still very much in place, taking the oil. And this is their environmental legacy that they're trying to run away from.
And just this, I don't know if it's confusion or is it, as you say, obfuscation around the divestment of Shell from this company and its obligations in the area. How would that impact whatever findings or judgments is made around whether Shell should clean up or whether Renaissance should do that, as in who ought to be held accountable?
Well, legally, it's clear that it is now the new legal entity, Renaissance, that will have to do it. That will have to do the cleanup if the judge says it hasn't been done properly. But we, the community, have said, look, if Renaissance or Shell are not going to do it, then they're going to have to put money into a trust, and independent experts from the UN and other very reputable organizations will be appointed, and they will do it themselves, because they've been waiting for since 2008 for them to clean up. Under Nigerian law, this should have been cleaned up within 30 days, and here we are, 15 years later. 17 years later, and they still haven't done it.
That's another thing I'm interested in. If there is transparency beyond the ownership, but the environmental responsibilities, do they then share the international standards for the cleanup operations that would be employed?
Well, I mean, it's Nigerian law that governs all this, and Nigerian law basically adopts very similar international cleanup standards to the rest of the world, and imports the American Oil Petroleum Institute standards for cleanup. These are kind of international recognized standards and methodologies that are approached to oil spill cleanup. And on paper, Nigeria looks very good. It's got some fantastic regulations and rules and standards. It's just in practice, it isn't implemented. And that's the real tragedy, not only for Bodo, but as I say, for hundreds of communities like it that have been polluted by Shell, but also other big oil companies.
Well, Daniel, will certainly keep in touch and follow through these preliminary or pre-trial hearings and find out where it's likely to end, and of course just see how the matter concludes. Daniel Leader, partner at law firm Lee Day, who's working on this case, speaking to us from London, where the case is being heard at the High Court in London. This is oil company Renaissance, which Shell recently sold its online, or rather onshore, Nigerian operations in the Bodo community, is facing trial there. It brings the time to 21 minutes past 9.
Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mokoenata@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Africa Update on Channel Africa with Lulu Kabu.
Protesters in Ghana have accused the country's president of violating the constitution and interfering in the independence of the judiciary. Eric Mawena Egbeta, the opposition protesters are calling for the reinstatement of Tokonu.
The presidency and the president and all of its spokespersons around the seat of government have had one narrative and one narrative only, that no constitutional breaches have occurred in the process up until now, which has resulted in the suspension of the Chief Justice. In fact, it does appear the government has already communicated to these protesters that we're not interested in having the Chief Justice return and fill her position until the determination of the matter. We believe that she must remain suspended for the investigations to take place, after which the final determination will inform whether or not she returns.
Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, 12 to 1 p.m. Central African Time. Nighttime radio, just the way you like it, on Channel Africa, where the night comes alive.
23 minutes past 9, you are listening to Africa World Hour, where we give you a wrap of the day's top stories from here on the continent and beyond. Of course, we bring you the latest on what's happening in the international front as well. First, let's talk about the South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration continuing to push for transformation in the country. Speaking at the Africa CEO Forum in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, Ramaphosa says the 49 white Afrikaners who have left for the United States are not facing persecution in South Africa. President Donald Trump's administration is offering refugee status to some white South Africans who claim they are facing discrimination. The South African government has criticized the program, describing it as a politically motivated incident. Bonolo Maribe has more.
We've raised our own concern because those people who are being enticed to go to the United States do not fit the definition of a refugee. A refugee is someone who has to leave their country out of fear of political persecution, religious persecution, or economic persecution.
President Ramaphosa has broken his silence and claims that no one is being persecuted in South Africa. He has been reacting to the 49 Afrikaners who have left for the US under the Trump's administration refugee program.
They don't fit that description. And I had a conversation with President Trump on the phone, and he said, what's happening down there? And I said, President, what you've been told by those people who are opposed to transformation back home in South Africa is not true. And I added to him, I said, we were well taught by Nelson Mandela and other iconic leaders like Oliver Tambo on how to continue to build a united nation.
Ramaphosa has also used this working visit in Côte d'Ivoire to highlight that South Africa is ready for the G20 summit.
We are excited as South Africa and very privileged to be heading the G20 for the very first time on the African continent, and we're particularly pleased that our own continent as a whole, through the AU, is now a member and will be participating fully as we get the world to discuss our priorities and our theme, which is solidarity, equality as well. And as we do all that, we expect that our key priorities will become top of mind in the discussions that are currently taking place leading up to the Leaders Summit in November.
The South African president says that the African continent must strive for peace, especially where there are conflicts.
The processes that have been happening on the continent, either the Nairobi process, the Luanda process, AU process, have been very, very essential in building a foundation of peacemaking and also confidence building, up to and including agreements that have been reached for a ceasefire between the belligerents, up to and including the withdrawal of, say, the SADC forces.
Meanwhile, Rwandan President Paul Kagame has called on all African countries to work together and deal with conflicts and coups on the continent.
In terms of peace and security, and you look at the whole continent, you find there are many trouble spots, all kinds of efforts going on, back and forth, succeeding in some places, not succeeding in others, and continued efforts going on. Again, these are some of the areas, because of the past and how we have handled our own affairs, that we are all of a sudden reminded that we can't do all things by ourselves.
President Ramaphosa hopes to consolidate bilateral ties with Côte d'Ivoire. The host of this year's Africa CEO Forum is one of South Africa's strategic partners in West Africa. Bonolo Maribe in Johannesburg.
27 minutes past 9. We'll tell you a little bit more about that U.S. refugee landing, so to speak, in Washington, D.C., a group of Afrikaners who've taken up the offer by U.S. President Donald Trump to stay in the United States under the refugee status, which is something, of course, South Africa's International Relations and Cooperations Minister Ronald Lamola has questioned, saying that they don't qualify for refugee status. We'll also tell you about US-China relations following that meeting that took place over the weekend in China to hash out their tariff tit-for-tat conflict. An agreement has now been reached. We'll be speaking to political economist shortly, Dale McKinley, to tell us a little bit more about that. And of course, we'll also tell you about a warning that has been put out by the World Food Programme. They are saying that persistent conflict, displacement, economic deterioration, and recurrent extreme weather in West and Central Africa are driving millions of people towards emergency levels of hunger. So all of that and more coming up. Let's take a quick break.
Hi there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all requests to mokoena@SABC. That's MOKOENATA@SABC. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
My name is Neto, NETO Chamani. Osiyatiko nengezimo mkhandlu phandle kunjani moyani. Voko tendele. Africa at Play asiteleli siyashaya. Africa's velvet voice is in the house. Africa at Play is a place to be where we speak all things sport and music from the African continent to the rest of the world. We speak to your bundles of joy in sport, 12-year-olds and below, teenagers in sport, and we speak to elite athletes, administrators, coaches, and all the behind-the-scenes stakeholders of sport and music. Africa at Play, asiteleli siyashaya. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And here's something that should be interesting to hear from an African perspective, and that is, of course, the Global Nurses Day, International Nurses Day. We talk about World Nurses Day also. So the global nursing workforce, we believe, has grown from 27.9 million in 2018 to 29.8 million. That was counted in 2023. But wide disparities in the availability of nurses remain across regions and countries. This is evidence coming out of the State of the World's Nursing Report 2025. It's published by the World Health Organization, International Council of Nurses and Partners. Inequities in the global nursing workforce leave many of the world's population without access to essential health services, which can, of course, threaten progress towards universal health coverage, global health security, and health-related development goals. We are joined now by the lead author of the report, who will speak to her shortly, Dr. Carrie McCarthy, who's at the WHO headquarters. Unfortunately, we had her on the line, but we promptly lost it again. So we will see if we can get her back on the line to speak to us about that very important report. So let's go on now to other news. Africa's premier tourism showcases Africa's Travel Indaba. It's officially underway in Durban, South Africa. The 3-day trade show is preceded by the Business Opportunity Networking Day, better known as Bond Day. It's a space for knowledge, exchange, thought leadership, and of course setting the tone for deals to be made on the trade floor. Our reporter Lebogang Mabange has more from the Nkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Center.
From discovery to connection and growth, the Bond Day has returned with a powerful message and renewed energy. Industry leaders, tourism professionals and stakeholders gathered in Durban to explore the future of African tourism. The Chief Executive Officer of South African Tourism, Nombulelo Guliwe, opened the day by emphasizing the importance of knowledge sharing and global collaboration.
Today is about travel and tourism knowledge sharing. You know, nothing is as powerful as information, as engaging and sharing experiences. So I hope we'll use the next couple of hours to do just that. You'll also hear, as Carol said, global best practices, learn from global tourism trailblazers and explore innovations transforming the tourism global landscape.
The Bond Day is not just a precursor to the trade exhibition, it is a strategic platform where conversations ignite ideas. Dr. Gregory Davids, chairperson of the South African Tourism Board, described Bond Day as a collaborative space that goes beyond professionals, one that inspires vision.
We come together at Bond Day not only as professionals, but as visionaries and thought leaders to shape the next chapter of the African tourism. Bond Day is our shared space. It is an opportunity for reflection, for knowledge sharing, and the co-creation of knowledge. This 3 days, and particularly today, is quite important.
Dr. Davids also reminded delegates that Africa's Travel Indaba is more than just an industry gathering, it's a force for transformation.
It is this interaction, in my view, of public and private, local and global, that gives Indaba the credibility to influence, inspire and impact on the tourism ecosystem locally and abroad. Africa Travel Indaba is much, much more than only an exhibition. It's a catalyst. This is where trade meets transformation.
Among the inspiring voices on the Bond Day stage was Africa's first female dredge master, Captain Londiwe Ngobo, who urged delegates to connect with their business purpose before showcasing it to the world.
We've been told that we're here to discover, to connect, and to grow. And if we're here to discover, I hope that before you even represent your company, you remember these two questions. Before others can discover your business, have you truly discovered it? Have you truly? Because I'll be speaking to you, not the walls, as we connect. What is the heartbeat of your offering? And does it still align with why you started.
As the tourism industry rebuilds and adapts post-COVID, the Bond Day sets the tone for the deals, partnerships and innovations expected over the next 3 days. From here, it's all about showcasing Africa's diversity and tourism potential to the global market. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa.
Well, let's take you from KZN to Geneva as we reflect on what we mentioned earlier on International Nurses Day. So the World Health Organization and International Council of Nurses and Partners have released the State of the World's Nursing 2025 report. We're on the line now to Dr. Carrie McCarthy at the WHO to speak to us about the findings of this report, to tell us about the global nursing workforce. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for your patience on logging on. I know technology can be a bit of a struggle sometimes, just keeping the bandwidth together. But anyway, here we are. So
exactly.
We're looking at a population or workforce of 29.8 million. That was in 2023. So we're 2 years later. Has there been a significant change since those figures of 2023?
Well, our last time we did the State of the World's Nursing Report, it was in 2020, and we had about 28 million nurses. We're currently up to 30 million nurses, approximately. So that is an increase from our last report that we did 5 years ago. We're also seeing a decrease in the global shortage of nurses. It was 6.2 million in 2020, and right now we're at 5.8 million. So we have seen that decrease as well. However, we actually have seen a deepening in the inequities of where those nurses are located. So while globally the numbers are looking better, if you look region by region, actually we see deepening inequities in where the nurses are located.
Okay, so let's talk about where are they located and why, because we know some countries face a severe shortage while others have a surplus, and it doesn't correlate with the health needs of populations.
Right. It's very inequitably distributed. Just in terms of the density, for example, there's a 10-fold difference in how many nurses there are per 10,000 population in high-income countries as opposed to low-income countries. There's about 78, almost 80% of the world's nurses are located in countries that only make up half the population. By income category, high-income countries only make up about 17% of the population, but again, almost half of the nurses are located there. So we see a real difference by income category and by region. And what that means is in those countries that have low density or don't have enough nurses, they're really not getting access to essential health services. And that's part of what's driving some of the health impacts and the slowing progress on health indicators like universal health coverage that we're seeing. And we're only 5 years out from the end of the Sustainable Development Era. 2030 is this target. And if we don't address these inequities and make sure everyone has access to health services and the nurses in their communities, then we're never going to reach it. And so that's of a big concern.
So what suggestions is the report making, if at all, on how to deal with these inequities? Because as you say, there are the 2030 targets, and there's also what we're seeing is an increasingly skewed financial environment in helping reach some of those goals.
Right. Well, the State of the World's Nursing 2025 is intended to be used by different countries, specific countries. We have what's called a country profile for every WHO member state that reflects back the data for the nursing workforce in that country. And then it's up to country leaders to decide what is the action that's needed depending on your data. So for instance, you might have, if you have a shortage of nurses, it's important to look at the graduation rate. So how many graduate nurses are coming out of the pipeline? Do you have jobs for them to go into the health system and employ them right out of school? what are the working conditions like? Are they helpful to retain nurses, or are they perhaps fueling out migration? What are issues like pay and safety and that sort of thing? And also leadership development is really important to nurses as well, having those opportunities to advance. So when you're looking at sort of the policy framework for nursing, we have a set of policies in each of those areas of those jobs, the employment, the education, the working conditions, and the leadership. So it's a matter of identifying which of the policy priorities apply and are going to help that country address their specific needs.
Okay, well, let's look at some of those, maybe for 2026 to 2030, the policy priorities that have been identified. While I understand that it is not necessarily a directive, but surely it must be an indication of the landscape.
Yes, definitely. So there are 12 policy priorities in an existing strategy that the World Health Assembly next week is meeting and is anticipated to extend the global strategy for nursing. So there's 12 in there in those jobs and education and leadership and service delivery. But this new report came out, found that there were 5 new priority areas that we had to focus on and had to direct that global attention to and provide some guidance for countries who have concerns and have priorities in those areas. And those were about supporting nurses in fragile, vulnerable, and conflict-affected areas. It was about how to empower nurses and nurse leaders to be active in the climate and health agenda, how to harness digital health tools and technologies for nursing education and practice, and advanced practice nursing, which there was a lot of in the African region. So how to support and grow advanced practice nursing, and also addressing gender bias in nursing, because we know it's a highly feminized profession and we see gender pay gaps in nursing as well. So those are the 5 new areas that we've come up with in terms of emerging priorities for countries as well.
You mentioned mental health and well-being of nurses. Just the report itself, what does it highlight in terms of the dangers of not dealing with the immense pressures that nurses face? What would be the potential consequences of neglecting their needs in this regard?
You're right. That is it's a really big area in nursing right now, especially post-pandemic. And we know the stresses and strains and frankly trauma that nurses underwent in that pandemic. So there's we did find, unfortunately, that was one of the lowest indicators of the policies and measures in place in the work environment for nurses. Only 42% of countries have reported that they have sort of packages and services for the well-being of nurses in their work environment. So in the report, we suggest and we recommend countries definitely addressing that, providing those mental health supports and services. There's a wonderful policy document called Our Duty of Care that the WHO developed with WISH, the World Innovation Summit on Health, with guidelines for countries in terms of how to support their nurses, as well as we direct to countries to the policy guidance in the Global Health and Care Workers Compact, which was adopted or endorsed by the World Health Assembly, and it has guidance on how to assess your policies and resources for mental health of nurses and how to strengthen them. So we've put out a number of resources to support in this regard.
And just finally, the progress and adoption of advanced practice nursing roles and improvements in nursing leadership, what have you seen?
Well, we saw in 5 years ago, only 53% of countries reported that they had advanced practice roles. And now we have 62%, I want to say, of countries reporting advanced practice roles. So that's great. And we often see in countries that the lower the density of physicians, the more likely a country is to have to be utilizing nurse practitioners, or advanced practice nurses. So we know that they're filling a role in terms of expanding service delivery, expanding access to health services. So we know from a lot of research that the care they give is effective and it reaches those populations that sometimes are otherwise not reached by other health occupational groups. So we know they're an important tool in achieving universal health coverage. Some of the challenges are that they're not standardized in terms of the definition of an advanced practice nurse, how they're educated, how they're regulated, their scope of practice. None of these things are standardized country to country, so it's hard to have a good sense of how many there are and what they're doing exactly.
Thank you so much for your time, though. Much appreciated. Dr. Carrie McCarthy at the WHO. She's the lead author of that State of the World Nursing 2025 report, speaking to us live from Geneva. It's 15 minutes to 10.
My name is Neto, NETO Chamani. Osiyatiko nengezimo mkhanju phandle kunjani moyani. Voko tentele. Africa at Play asiteleli siyashaya. Africa's Velvet Voice is in the house. Africa at Play is a place to be where we speak all things sport and music from the African continent to the rest of the world. We speak to your bundles of joy in sport, 12-year-olds and below, teenagers in sport, and we speak to elite athletes, administrators, coaches, and all the behind-the-scenes stakeholders of sport and music. Africa at Play, asiteleli siyashaya. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le Diamant Rouge et Binal Export depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Ahoy, matey!
Captain here to help, right, boys?
Set sail with us on a digital voyage like no other. Channel Africa has a treasure trove of awesomeness. That is our website and social media pages.
Tell me, why are you here?
We want you to be part of our adventure.
The winds are changing, Captain. And this time...
Imagine a world where curiosity knows no bounds, where entertainment meets enlightenment, and where every click leads to the African perspective. Visit us on our website, www.channelafrica.co.za, or follow us on Instagram or on X at Channel Africa 1. Go on, like us on Facebook at Channel Africa 1. So, spread the word, tell a friend that Channel Africa's online variety is what they need on the web. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Nighttime radio, just the way you like it, on Channel Africa, where the night comes alive.
And indeed, it is alive with conversation. This particular conversation, it's been the subject of many debates and differences of opinion over the past couple of weeks. And of course, it's been the subject of diplomatic tensions. We're talking about the US and China agreeing to a truce to lower import taxes on goods being traded between the two countries. The agreement marks a major de-escalation of a trade war between the world's two biggest economies. Well, that's what some say, which of course has sent shockwaves throughout the globe, impacting other countries as well. So to speak about this, we on the line now to political economist Dr. Dale McKinley to speak to us about exactly what has happened in Geneva and if it's something that is sustainable. Dale, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thanks, Chipkinson, and thank you to your listeners and viewers. It's my pleasure.
So your assessment of this, tactical pause or strategic shift, and is it a genuine effort to de-escalate?
I would call it more of a tactical pause. I think that Donald Trump in particular is intent on, having a sort of tariff war of some sort, or the tariffs have become a policy tool of his. But what he's realized clearly in the last a few weeks, is that taking on China is a different thing than taking on small countries. And I think in that case, there's a realization that it's simple as this, that a continued trade war at the levels that they were going on, 145% tariffs and this kind of stuff, was simply untenable, not simply for the Chinese, but also for the United States. And both of them just basically took a reality check and said, let's rethink this, and that's what they've done.
So, I mean, without being dismissive, you saw the big boys take out their big guns, and now they've ended from over 100 percentage points for United States and China, for China, from the United States, a 30% hike for China, to the United States, a 10% hike. But I want to understand what these two disparate percentages mean for both, and why have we moved here, and just also the differences.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to say, if you listen to Trump and the rationale for why they started this thing in the first place, it was that there was a massive trade imbalance, and that's to some extent true. China's trade balance with the United States has always been positive, and has been growing, in fact, since COVID. In other words, the imports that the United States is getting from China far outweigh those that China is getting from the United States. So there is, if you see the differentiation in tariffs and the drops from in this case to 30% that the U.S. would levy on Chinese goods, and the 10% that China, that in some ways reflects that imbalance or that gap in terms of that trade, even though not exactly on those percentage terms, but it broadly reflects the sort of symbolic gap that exists there. And I don't think the Chinese are trying to contest that there's going to have to probably be some kind of gap between themselves, because they do understand that they have, in some ways, the upper economic hand in this. And I think that explains why you've got the kind of tariffs. I mean, I think they sort of sucked it from their thumbs in terms of what the percentages were, but in broad terms, they do reflect that symbolic gap.
And we do know in the past the U.S. president has been clear, especially based on conversations that were happening in the United States, that some sectors are going to be exempt from this. We saw the automotive industry, we saw some telecommunications items as well. So is that building on the past couple of weeks, or are we going to see more changes?
Look, the thing with Trump is you never know what to expect. I mean, as you can see, he shifts from day to day. And I think, saying this, I think we have to understand Trump's, why this is the case, is because he throws things out there, and 145% tariffs and so forth, and then he backs off and then comes to a deal in this case. So I think where you're going to get is that he has friends in high places that are all big tech, billionaires, and he doesn't want to hurt them. So, of course, he's going to try to get a better deal for the tech side. He also is realizing, for example, that one of his biggest backers, the oil and fossil fuel industry in the United States, would be quite hard hit by some of the tariffs going to China the other way. So he wants to get deals with them. So that's what Trump is. He's a transactional person. Transactional deals are reflective of where his interests lie and those who back him, and where he thinks he can get the most political support and economic support from. And so that's the way we can't adopt formal sort of mainstream economic analysis to apply to a Trump administration, precisely because they're bucking all of these trends, and you cannot know what to predict because it's a transactional relationship. It's not a sort of mainstream economic relationship following particular economic trade theories.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent saying that neither side wants to decouple. They've agreed that it's a strategic competition. So what evidence should we look to in the next couple of months to lay truth to the statement and the genuity of the statement?
Yeah, well, I think it's a foregone conclusion that, of course, they're not going to decouple. They can't afford to decouple. It's in some ways just a statement of reality. That's the reality. The question, I think, really is, the extent to which they're going to sort of dance around and continue to play this game of who's going to squeeze the most out of the other in that sense. So I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see back and forth. We're going to see deals being. This is Trump's sort of stock in trade. He's make a deal. And he'll make a deal in one sector, and then he'll balance it off with something there. But I think in the long term, probably I think that's going to sort of dominate the next few weeks or months. But in the longer term, there's probably going to be quite a bit of pressure for a much more serious trade deal that would cover a longer term, something not like a NAFTA that took years and years to negotiate, but something that's a little bit more strategically oriented and a little bit more permanent, as opposed to simply something that can be done away within 90 days. And I think this 90-day sort of time frame is clearly not enough to come to that kind of agreement. But what I think they're going to do is in those 90 days, they're going to sort of sound each other out and figure out what are the bases for the possibility of a longer-term deal. In the meantime, you're going to see this trading going back and forth.
And I suppose that's the whole point, that they have had discussions prior to this from 2018 where China itself has said that because of its failure to meet its purchase agreements, that they never had a conclusive agreement that could hold. So over the 90 days, what mechanism would ensure that they keep to the spirit of reaching a trade deal that has a much more sustainable structure?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing would be is if they come to agreements on, these sort of set tariffs and they keep to those things, or volumes, and whether or not, for example, there's an attempt by China, which there already have been, or at least the United States has accused them of, and I'm sure it cuts both ways, of trying to hide exports through third countries. In other words, exporting to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to South Korea, and then exporting on under different kinds of names so that it doesn't seem like it's coming from China. So I think what they're going to probably be doing is having checks on those things, investigations as to what's going on, relating to where the source of the exports are, and seeing if, in the case of the United States, seeing if China adheres to those kinds of more sort of temporary or shorter-term agreements before they would go into a longer term. On the other side, China is obviously going to be sounding out the United States on other fronts, because it's not simply just on the economic sort of trade front that they're concerned about. It's also, for example, on a lot of the technology transfers and the capability to access that technology, which the United States has been at least the Trump administration has been very worried about. So you're probably going to see mechanisms being put in place to try to control not only imports and exports and the volumes, but to basically bind both countries to particular set volumes and set production capacities. And I think that's going to take a lot longer than 90 days, obviously.
Just a quick one on this one, because I've got a final question to ask you, Dale. Firstly, are we going to see an immediate relief for global supply chains and those countries that have been impacted as a result of this TIF?
Yeah, you're going to certainly see it, and you've already seen it. There's been a bump in the markets. Especially the Asian markets have responded positively to this. And I think you're probably going to see an easing of the sort of anxiousness, and you've already seen the price of oil go up and other kinds of tech stocks and so forth. But the longer-term impact will be hard to predict at the moment, because it all depends on whether or not China and the United States, and particularly China, I think, resets their trade relationships with other countries. These bilateral deals that are being cut, for example, outside of the more global trade regime, and certainly the U.S.-China nexus, are going to impact on whether or not the U.S.-China fight or the negotiations are sort of formulated according to these other bilateral trade deals, or whether they are integrated into them.
And my final question is particularly around bilaterals. I'm looking specifically at South Africa, United States. Given the position South Africa finds itself in now, we've seen the first group of so-called refugees who've landed in Washington simply because the US president has a problem with South Africa's domestic policy on land and several other things. So will that be impacted, that relationship? Will South Africa have to make adjustments it certainly can't afford to make, because
I I think those adjustments will be fairly minor. Just to remind people that essentially, when the tariffs were announced on South Africa, of course, many of things were exempted. What was exempted? The things the United States needs from South Africa. In other words, the key exports that we make. There will be some, obviously, the citrus industry, the automotive industry to some extent would be quite affected by it. But I don't think there's going to be a total reset. I think what you're going to see is two things. One is you're going to see a sort of more realistic appraisal of what both countries need from each other, particularly the United States, despite all the rhetoric and the antics that Trump displays in his press conferences and his announcements. And the second thing you're going to see is hopefully that South Africa understands that this is an opportunity to reset its own trade relationships with other countries and to establish much better trade relationships and bilaterals, not only in our own continent, but possibly with Europe. And understand that our reliance on the United States for certain things is not some permanent set state of affairs, but can be adjusted, and this might be the opportunity to do so.
Dale, thank you so much, as usual, for your insights and opinions. Dale McKinley, political economist, brings us to exactly 10 o'clock. It's time now for Africa World Hour to India. And, of course, Hotlines is up next with Shayla Ndukumana. Till the next time, it's goodbye for now.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Mokwetla. Channel Africa.